Welcome to Decoded, the podcast that decodes the design, technology, and experiences shaping our world and planet. I am Elisa Leñero.
And I'm Saima Ahmed Christensen. Together we explore the systems, behaviors, and technologies influencing how we live, work, and connect, from human interactions to the ecosystems we are part of.
Each episode is a conversation with technologists, designers, entrepreneurs, and everyday users. Join us. Hi, welcome back to the show. I am Melissa.
And I'm Saima.
I'm a designer by training and currently rediscovering what design is in times where the world is challenged in many different ways, from the artificial intelligence revolution to deep societal changes and massive ecosystem destruction. In today's episode, we will be exploring regenerative design, and we're excited to have Professor Delfina Van Ditmar.
And I'm Saima Ahmed Christensen, a professor of design engineering and innovation, and also director of DigitLab, a research lab exploring design, particularly with digital technologies, based in the University of Exeter. So we're very pleased to have Delfina here, who is a senior researcher at the Royal College of Art, where she co-directs the UKRI-funded Becoming Regenerative Lab. She's also a research professor and chair of the Regenerative Art and Design Research Group at the Center of Applied Research for Art, Design and Technology, CARAT, in Amsterdam. And Delfina is quite unusual because she has a BA in biology and completed a PhD at the Royal College of Art in the School of Design, where she's taught in the MA in Design Products, the MSc in Joint MA between Imperial and RCA in Innovation Design Engineering, and also in the MA Fashion programs. She's driven by her interest in ecological thinking, reflective practices, and interrelations as a systemic response to the environmental collapse. And Delfina's critical practice examines materials ethic of care and the necessary paradigm shift in design. So welcome, Delfina. We've known each other for many years since the RCA, and I think since then your research has really evolved to start beginning and addressing some of these really big questions of societal and environmental challenges. And there's quite a lot to unpack in your bio. There's quite a lot in there in terms of your research interests. So should we start by talking about the ecological challenges that you describe? And perhaps you could talk a little bit about what these are from your perspective and what the paradigm shifts are that are needed for designers and perhaps even users to these.
Yes, I think how we're all experiencing from our summers, from perhaps our winters with these strange torrential rains, and by reading the news, the climate has been shifting quite a lot in the last, definitely 2 decades. So we are experiencing, even if if you're not involved intellectually or through your practice within ecological changes, how we are being affected by unprecedented climatic issues. We read how much biodiversity is decreasing. We are very much aware about all these targets that we need to reach at this point, not to go above a 2-degree change. We have trespassed 7 planetary boundaries already this year. The Stockholm Resilience Report updated us with a new boundary being trespassed. And when we trespass these boundaries, all that environmental instability can cause unprecedented changes that are really detrimental, not only for our life as human, but also for our shared planet. So with this in mind, for many, many years, we've been speaking about sustainability, which was very important in terms of reducing the harm and hazards that we bring through industrial processes and through practices. But considering the level of the crisis, that is definitely not enough because of this very eroded ecosystem and completely out of control parameters when it comes to toxicities and planetary effects of all in this industrialization and the Anthropocene. So within this context, it comes this notion of regeneration. which is a systemic approach grounded in principles of living systems, which actively focuses on bringing back health to social, ecological, economic, and material systems. So the main difference here with the sustainability paradigm, which was important to decrease these hazards, yet insufficient to confront the poly crisis that we're living, is it's bringing back health. So it goes way above doing less harm. And we really need to bring these positive effects and move away from the status quo. So it's not doing less harm and keep same practices, but has a really interesting component for me, which is about revisioning systems. And that is what really attracts me about the paradigm. It is the fact of the need of bringing health back. And also, this status quo cannot be possible anymore. So we need to revision the way we live and the way that we frame that future through these properties that are very much grounded on the living systems. But as we know also, any living system also depends on non-living aspects. So by this means, yes, we need to care about life, but life is also supported by minerals, by the air, by water. So it's this very systemic, integral approach that is really necessary.
Okay. If we also clarify some of the terminology that you're using, you mentioned the Anthropocene, and I think there's some research that suggests that we have passed that because. But can you just explain a little bit more the Anthropocene, kind of what is that, like, just to define it, and also just to give us an example what you are referring to, like very practical example of how this systemic change, as you are calling it, how this systemic change and also how we're bringing back health as a paradigm shift and not only through not harming the environment.
Yes. I mean, the Anthropocene is widely understood as a period or an era in which human activity has been influencing Earth geological processes and also the climate. So is widely used as a term to define how humans, through these unhealthy practices, very much as a result of the Industrial Revolution, have been affecting the climate. I mean, when I study biology, it's not that the climate hasn't changed before the so-called Anthropocene, because we've seen how the, let's say, CO2 in the atmosphere has been changing within different epochs, and that has to do with geological processes, gases liberated by natural, systems, species that were prevalent that were also doing some kind of metabolic activity. But since the industrialization, these parameters have been completely off, and that is a result of human activity. Mm-hmm. So that's what I refer with the Anthropocene, is human practices that have been influencing both climate and also geological process. A part of the evolutionary story of the Earth, in which, yes, we have seen those changes. They have happened. And I think this is widely what, some people, maybe specifically if we can say in the US, or this climate crisis denialist, get hold and say, oh, this is not about the current level of pollution. This has always been happening, which is partially true, but it's not in the degree that we have seen, since we humans are really going completely above all the healthy parameters within the Industrial Revolution evolution.
Right. And the other question was, can you give us a clear example of how this currently is being taking shape on not only on the sustainability side, which is doing no harm, but also bringing life into new parameters, or into bringing back health in the paradigm shift?
Yes, and I think a very good way to explain this is through examples. So I can give you a few. Going back to this interesting team composition, there is this really nice venture that came out of innovation, design, and engineering from Imperial College and the RCA, and they have a company called Materra, and what they're doing is they're helping farmers in India to change from doing chemical agriculture and moving to regenerative agriculture. So what's the difference? One is water intensive, toxic intensive, you use all these pesticides. Usually it's like a monocrop, so you can see a clear effect of those practices within the soil. A more sustainable approach could be, okay, let's decrease a little bit the toxicity. But now if I compare it with regenerative agriculture, you multi-crop, you don't use pesticides, and you end up using also less water. And this is quite quantifiable. But now in a way, moving it more to a design process, what these entrepreneurs are doing is they are contacting all these farmers. They started with very few. Now they have more than 5,000 case studies. So you can add the land that is being regenerated, which you can measure how the soil is now much more healthy. And you can do that through understanding the life there and also the mineral properties and the less toxicity. So these are quite measurable variables in terms of healing and making a positive effect. And what they do now is they created this app called CoFarm. And again, now we have a component of UX, in which they help these farmers to be able to be regenerative. And as you know, if you get a pest and you don't have pesticides, you need actually to act fast and cleverly. So they have a group of people that are experts on this and that can be contacted. And this in India is also very important because in different areas, they have different dialects. And this app actually includes not only the specific language, so these farmers can actually communicate, but also the app was created through also incorporating ancestral practices. Because before all this monocrop pesticide chemical practice, they were really healthy practices. So it's bringing back also that knowledge that somehow has been lost because of this industrial revolution that also came with a lot of toxicity. And what they do is they do regenerative cotton and they sell this to companies. And the way that they can do this is by Matera also putting in numbers all the life cycle assessment measurements and recording also how is this cotton regenerating, which is less water, the state of the soil, and the carbon emissions. So this is a very, very measurable approach and is really increasing the health of India and is giving these farmers a job because, again, you immediately find them a buyer to make this also economically possible. And I can give you another example from the UK. Again, there are innovation, design, and engineering students. I want to speak also about the composition of the group because I think that's very fascinating. There's someone from business, someone from engineering, someone from design, and someone from chemistry. So a very complete group. And they have a company called Ponda, and they are working in the wetlands in Scotland. I don't know if you're aware, but because of this heat and people using the peat and also doing these ditches, when you take the water and also with the weather conditions, the carbon that has been stored in these wetlands, which it's an enormous amount, often way more than one forest can do, starts to get liberated. And that has a huge, huge, huge CO2 emission. So they went to this part of Scotland where this problem was happening. And then they saw the farmers who were doing, again, chemical agriculture. And what they did, they started collecting the head of this wetland plant called taifa. And they discovered that the structure of this head was really amazing because it has like this shape. So it's very open. And that is very hydrophobic and creates warmth. So it's a really good replacement for synthetics and feathers to create, like, for example, like the filling part of a jacket. So what they did is they convinced these farmers, and I have interviewed them. I'm a big fan of that venture. And they call these experimental farmers, and they managed those farmers to shift from that chemical agriculture practice that they had to start working, recollecting this upper part of taifa. And again, let's be very practical and speak about how is this bringing back health. Well, those farmers stopped doing chemical agriculture, and then they're creating this biomaterial that is an excellent replacement for both feathers and also synthetics. And because they're re-wetting the wetlands, they are preventing a lot of CO2 of being released. And this is, if you enter into their website, it's all being measured. They work with NGOs to get all these statistics. So it's scientifically evidently proved that by doing this innovative approach towards a biomaterial, they are actually creating a very, very positive effect on that region. And I think that's really fascinating for so many reasons, because of the transition of those farmers, because designers are actually now having this incredible, environmental effect as well.
Yeah, so those two examples are great. So the first one, you touched a little bit on life cycle analysis, and there's tools that are very much in place for sustainability perspective. And then the second one is talking, so what I've understood from the first one, the positive, so the good that you're doing. So we're saying you want to do less bad, but you also want to do good. If we could put that as simple as that for the regenerative design. The good in the first one is about biodiversity. Is that right? And then the second one is about carbon capture and retaining carbon capture. Do you have if you had the definition of regenerative design, are there other areas it extends to
In
terms of the good that you're doing? So you could do. So is it mainly around biodiversity and carbon capture?
It can also, for example, create a new economy. So I think in a way, in both cases, you're doing a new economy, and it can also restore some communities as well. For example, there are other cases. I am working in the Netherlands with a researcher also that graduated from IDE with a beautiful project on resin tapping. And I go back also, if there's also a prevalent rescuing discourse in bringing back ancestral practices that are being lost. So it's also about culture.
Yes.
So he's working in the Mediterranean forest, where, as you know, or if you read the news, there's a lot of wildfires in summers in Spain. They're really unstoppable. So back in the time, you had resin tappers that were in the forest and were taking this resin, which has amazing properties, including that it can get effects similar to glass, for example. And this skill of resin tapping has been lost. A lot of people in these areas now move to cities, so these forests are almost completely abandoned. And now all this resin, it can be imported from Brazil, China. So in a way, they're not having the job. But it's not just that they're getting the job and they're heading to the cities, in a way, helping with this kind of urbanization, is that the forest has no eyes or people having a look and taking care and being present. So when a fire starts, this thing is unstoppable. So in his project, what he's trying to do is to reestablish this practice, also to bring back that economy that used to be quite strong and now is decaying. And at the same time, he's trying to explore what can we do with that resin. So he's working now at this moment with the chemistry department to see how can we enhance that property. But it's not, what I really like about that project is not like a material innovation project detached from the community and the environment where all this is happening. It is actually to add on to that economy and to that community as well. And of course, there is a big gain in using a biomaterial rather than an extractive material based on either the increased use of sand or synthetics. So this is what I refer when it's not just about the biodiversity. it can also bring back health to a community that has been disintegrated because of these other kinds of economies and also lifestyles that are very much attached to the cities.
This is great to hear. I think it is part of, I just want to meet all these people because of, so the work that we do at IDE, which we can talk about what ID means. ID, not the course in the masters that we have at Imperial and the RCA, but I work for an NGO that is called IDE, and this is exactly what we do in terms of working with farmers. And we call it also regenerative agriculture, and it's very similar to what you were saying, like bringing new economies around culture, rescuing some of the native practices that were lost because of the 70s revolution, where like GMOs came into countries and so on. So I think it is great to hear that also in education and in masters, these areas are being kind of explored, not only through an NGO practice, but also through a private practice. So this is, I would love to know more about, and we could put in the show notes the different links to the website and the startups that you are mentioning. In one of your when we were talking, you also mentioned regenerative imagination. So what can you tell us about regenerative imagination? And I don't know if that is linked to some of the climate change deniers or denials of people not really believing what is that this is happening. So what can you tell us about regenerative imagination, and what is a role as well of design in all of this?
Well, I'm really glad that you asked that, because that is one of the parts that really fascinate me, a part of the measurable positive environmental effects, which is the hopeful part. And what I like about
exactly.
But it's true. And, this new generation is existing in a really dooming scenario. If you open the newspaper, everything is alarming. Everything is mostly, negative news. So if we don't get hold of that space of possibility and hope, I don't think we're entering into a very attractive space to operate and develop ourselves. So I think the great value of design is space for possibilities and for the unimaginable. It's not based on anything retrospective, and it has a really important creative element. So what I love, me being a scientist and have been working within art schools and collaborating also with designers and architects also in some projects, is the unbounded imagination, which is not predictable. So this is like also something that AI cannot do.
Yes. Yeah.
So you get all these strange connections and visions that if it's framed within a certain context, I think you can get very unexpected things, like all these examples that I just gave you. They're coming with designers on board. And I think they're all really powerful, and they're not coming out of pure engineering nor pure science. They're coming actually from mixing a diverse set of talents, but including designers that are thinking far off and that have a lot of oxygen to go far off. But then, as you also could see in the examples, the result of that imaginative idea turns out to be having very measurable effects. So from a pedagogical point of view, I think it's very important to give creative the space to think about these topics and don't cut them in the very beginning, like, oh, that's not feasible or that would never work out. So give them some time to play around, but also give them the right support when they want to make this feasible. Because what you really want to have is a really original idea that yet has very measurable either societal, economical, culturally, or environmental effects. So this is where the magic happens, is when you actually then support this unexpected great idea land kind of graciously in the reality and in the impact that they can have in this very damaged world. And then again, we see actually this is possible. You can measure this. They're doing great. And we need to bring more people to this scene because, yeah, lots of things can be much better.
Yeah, those are really, they're really clear examples and really, really interesting to hear those perspectives. And I completely understand your perspective on the creativity in AI. I've written actually a lot about it, and we can demonstrate that space and the diversity of thought that human beings, particularly creative human beings, have in relation to AI generated. But going back to this notion of creating those spaces and not stopping them or preventing them, once you pass that, I mean, I recall from my time in RCA, I always used to encourage the students to think beyond the studio. And how do you evaluate the projects beyond the studio? So this is coming to the question of barriers to regenerative innovation and regenerative design. So if you go around the shows, you see some beautiful ideas, but you just think, how are you going to monetize these? So you can do it through the routes Melissa's talking in her role, like her work in the NGOs. If you weren't in an NGO, so for example, the farming world, so we've worked a lot of that with farmers. And one barrier that they have with farmers is to motivate them to share data. Why should they? So that's the app. So as soon as you've got one, the digital literacy question, and two, what's in it for them? And I guess there, in that first example that you said, it's a material. You said called it. I can't remember the name. But
Yes.
yep. They have an incentive, which is by having multi-crops, and there's something beneficial for them. In the other examples, I wonder how does that become economically sustainable? Or is it relying on charity support to then be able to create because the health and the regenerative help and being able to measure that impact, that's brilliant. For designers, we'll have different types of careers. And even if you're a startup, you will then have to gain the financial support and a business model that works alongside. What are the sort of examples you see as you sort of move further in that journey, once you've had the space to make these economical viable, or the barriers that you see currently?
Well, I'm really glad we're talking about this because this has to be addressed.
Yeah.
From both stands, as you were saying, Saima, one is from the educational point of view. I think it would be very beneficial that some courses actually touch upon those real economic entrepreneurial barriers that they're going to hit as soon as you leave this nice bubble, which is the master.
Yeah.
Because then they hit it. And this is something that I know through the investigations that we're doing at Becoming Regenerative, because we have 78 empirical case studies in which we ask to each of them, what happened after, you left the university with this great idea. And then a lot of designers become CEOs. And then you have to speak about finance. And not only then you're trying to chase money and you have to be really good at it, but also then you are operating in a system that has also policies that are not ready for the incredible innovation that you came across. And this is something that I touched upon recently. I was invited to Davos.
Yeah.
So we addressed there with investors that had experience working in the field that finance also has to change, because you cannot expect the same results working with fossil fuel derivatives than the ones that you will be working on with nature positive solutions, which generally take way more time, are more expensive because you need to compete with everything that is, again, cheaper. The machinery is not there sometimes to re-implement whatever process but bio. So you're going to hit also a manufacturing issue. And you need to be competitive in price. And you have a team that is small. And basically now you're a designer that are a CEO, constantly trying to find ways around policies that are not there yet in a regenerative advanced way. You need to constantly certify this, which is incredibly expensive. If you're a small company, also you have no priority in these certification facilities. And then you need to keep your team doing the R&D and showing this to your investors quite quickly. while at the same time you're not competitive in price yet, because the system, I tell you, it's really not incentivizing this yet. So I do think that from an educational perspective, is extremely important to perhaps equip them better. If you're going to be a startup, then you are actually playing the game of being in an economic system that is not ready, that we have to actively shape through policies. So something that we want to do now with the grant is work with not all, but a selected group of entrepreneurs that are actually crashing into all of these obstacles, and work with policymakers to see how can we move this forward. But again, going back to practical examples, I can also give you some. There is this also very fascinating example. Is the startup of an RCA graduate from architecture and someone from Cambridge. I think she has a background in chemistry, and they have a company called Shellworks. And Shellworks works by using food waste and fermenting this, creating a bio packaging, which is, first of all, so beautiful. So it's aesthetically really remarkable. And then that you can compost it. So it's a biopolymer, and it performs really well. There's nothing to say about its performance. When you want to take it into the market, most of the policies now are very much focused on circularity, because we have the mindset of, let's say, plastic. So it has to be recyclable. When something actually that is biodegradable, I mean, needless to say how much better it is for the environment, but we're not there yet in policies. So, for example, in Tesco, they have a system in which they catalog your product in basic way, green, yellow, or red in terms of recyclability. And you're green when you are more recyclable. So they're not recyclable. And this is not only happening to Shellworks, it's happening also to other companies. Because you're not recyclable, you don't have a good score. Yet you're environmentally so much more superior. But the system penalizes you because the policies are not there. So all this to go back to the teams and this crash with the reality. A lot of the team's time is spent to find ways around this, to chase money also, because the R&D is kind of, it takes time, but also is in finding ways around policies. There are certain categories in the building industry, for example, mycelium in certain parts is not in a category yet. So that you don't have the category to put it into the building industry. You cannot sell a product with no certifications. Plus, every certification is really expensive. So you're a startup and you're spending a lot of your money in these certifications and finding a way of where to put categories. Often they have to enter to other categories. Like, for example, there's a company doing algae packaging, but algae is not packaging because packaging is almost a synonym of plastic. So they're like food instead of being packaging. Then I know a mycelium company that has to be called that they're doing wood, but they're not wood. Mycelium is not wood. The category is not yet there. So this really has to be sorted out and has to be an active work that the field needs also to make the life easier to these incredible people that are super talented, but are wasting a lot of the team's time in these kind of things, rather than to focus on like, how do we do the next iteration or what's our next project?
Yeah, this is interesting because I think what you're describing there is also true of other types of innovative work. So if you look back at autonomous vehicles, sort of particularly 2015, 2016, I attended many of the government's organized or funding bodies organized initiatives. And one of the things they were pushing for at that point was, while you're innovative, while you're trying to develop autonomous vehicles, so this is before Tesla, but, so at different readiness or autonomous levels, to also move legislation and regulation with you and to do that together. And I guess what you're pointing to there's some thinking around what is a good environmental impact, and it's currently focused on recyclability, rather than, and so that can catch people out. I think the other bit that I'm interested in, and maybe we can't unpack it all today because we've did an episode on planetary skills. We also talked about that there. And one of our barriers, I think, there is, so you've got the barriers of policies and regulations playing catch up with innovative areas. And I think this partly is the role of academics to sort of work, to do this on a larger scale than just a single startup having to do this. But the other barriers there is, you talked about R&D investment and the barriers to investment. I'm interested in, how do you actually make money? Or are these all just charitable projects? Because if the business needs to be sustainable, you need a return on investment. So that's the business model bit. The startups, we could see a lot of startups coming out of universities, and their success rate a year or 2 or 3 later is a different measure. And that's, there's a whole barrier on startups across industry and how they scale, particularly in the UK. But have you seen really good examples on how they do the business model, or are they having to learn along the way, or is most of this as charitable funding?
They have a lot of. There's no one. Something that we've been analyzing is there's no one recipe.
Yes,
and also different startups want, going back to the original idea of regeneration, not all of them want to scale a lot. For some of them, they're working with one community and they want to understand it really well, and they don't want to scale more because for them in a regenerative manner makes no more sense. While others, for example, if you're working in replacing plastic packaging, the problem is so big that they really want to scale and fully replace something that is quite large. So we've been also seeing different approach to scaling. And the problem with this investing part is, I mean, there are also some progressive investors. I don't want to put all the investors in the same category, but the majority wants a fast return and scale. This is like the classic model. And that puts a lot of pressure in these teams that cannot always deliver that. So some people have some government funding that allows them more like a long scale. Some others have philanthropy combined with venture capital. So each of them also have a different path. Many of them also had gone through Innovation RCA or Undaunted, and that had created specific other path also for them. So there was also no one recipe in terms of the composition of the investment. And some of them are more successful than others in terms of how they are being able to capitalize, especially the ones associated with these big problems that are at scale. They're more able to get more revenue, or for example, what I was explaining about Materra, being more able to then work with big companies. So there are different startups at different stage of how they can become more self-sustaining. But I think if we don't change the policy, and with this, I think there are 2 interesting points. One is, how do we champion and facilitate this to happen through very real measures? But also, how do we penalize the ongoing use of fossil fuel derivatives that makes also life so much harder for these nature positive solutions to be competitive with? So for me, it's about championing and allowing them to flourish, while at the same time we need to start slowly penalizing everything that is more toxic. So then the market also become more interesting, so the companies have more incentive to get this kind of things and not that kind of products. So for me, it goes hand in hand with this regulatory framework that really has to evolve, and at the moment it's just not there.
Yeah. You mentioned also something about designers becoming the CEOs, and I can sometimes relate to that. And I want to tie that back to the unbounded imagination that you mentioned that designers have. So what I would like to ask you is, what would be, how can we elevate the unbounded imagination that happens when you combine different disciplines, especially when you put design at the center with other disciplines. How do you think that could be monetized, or how can we talk about that? How can that be leveraged in a world where there's a lot of noise around AI or technology, or like just everything needs to be now put into AI? How can we talk about that and leverage that in a unbounded imagination, as you call it? And then the other comment about designers being CEOs, I think also that's also kind of like when you create a startup, we designers, we love to be part of the designing process and to continue doing what we were doing at the masters. And sometimes you are like, you found yourself founding a company and you're like, oh, but I don't want to be, doing all these admin things and thinking about funding, et cetera, et cetera. So I think also that's a thin line between continue doing what you are good at and what you enjoy, but also sometimes it's like, who could be the right person to lead this kind of startups if the unbounded imagination can be part of the strategy, but also needs to continue pushing the development of a product or service, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the point is, the question is about how do we leverage the unbounded imagination in a world filled with noise?
Yes, and in that way, I'm going to always come back to the positive and the value of the designers. I think there are three things that really came to my mind when you were framing this last question. Designers come up with very original thinking, and they manage to translate the thinking into something that is quite tangible. Designers are historically very good in connecting with different fields, so they're very good translators. And I think that helps a lot also when it comes to what it means to speak with very different stakeholders and to put, different hats on for different kind of task. So they're very also flexible in that way, which is not the case in many other disciplines.
Yeah.
And design is a space of possibilities, which is slightly different of the original thinking. So I think if you combine all this and you think about the business, there is a lot of scope to creating a beautiful business model. And this came up in a discussion. Europe now has this kind of motto that you need to be sustainable and beautiful. That beauty, when it comes to the relation of what you do, I think it's very interesting. This came up in one event of Bauhaus Earth. It was by this architect Niklas van Elsa. He connected this idea of beauty being brought on in the European mission for the green economy to the business model based on relations. So connecting that idea of beauty in the business model when it comes to very ethical and caring relations in connection to originality, the ability of designers to speak with other people and translate things and orchestrate systemic thinking, plus design as a space of possibilities. I think a lot can be done. And this, instead of becoming like, oh my God, now I need to, take care of finance, what I want to do is to be, hands-on iterating my innovation, can become a space that is quite experimental and interesting. And I think that's when this starts to make sense for a designer.
Absolutely. And I think, Delfina, you've put there quite beautifully some of the values that designers can bring. I now, as you probably know, sit in a business school still as a designer. And the thing that was really fascinating to me there is I sort of saw business models as this mysterious thing. And I think in design schools, that's how we've been teaching design and keeping it separate. What I have also realized, so we've been doing work on data-driven design, so different application, but we realized that to adopt AI or adopt data into your business models or new products, into your products, also relies thinking about new business models. And I think the thing that you've said about the beauty in those spaces is really realizing that design can also play a role in developing very creative business models, and creative being used, not creative finances, but creative. So it's beauty, and it can provide economical sustainability with new ways of thinking that are also co-develop alongside the innovation and ideas. I think demystifying it and bringing these into the areas, and perhaps it's a space that's missing, because you pointed to circular economy and the idea of the so circular economy business models are parts of research agendas around different universities and elsewhere. But you don't see much more. You don't see designers sitting in that space. In our lab, we work together with social sciences and computer science and designers all together, and it's because we see the need of bringing that together. And what surprised me in that journey is really realizing how close we are to each other without realizing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think bringing that together, perhaps that's the next step that we need to move regenerative design to being self-financed and sustainable and developing new models, as well as being in NGOs and other parts in there. So the other takeaways I've got from today is regenerative design is about not just doing less bad things, but going beyond doing less bad things, but doing good. This could be both biodiversity, it could be ecological, but also bringing back practices and cultural practices. So there's doing good mixed with reducing the bad. So it's a fundamental shift. What I've understood is that there's not one way to do this. And that is true of all design, and that makes it sometimes intangible because it's in ill-defined areas. So you have multiple solutions, multiple pathways. So it sometimes makes it tricky to understand the value for other fields. But bringing other fields alongside, so the team compositions you've showed in there are creating the spaces without one way of solution, but nurturing that process alongside in there. Is there any other takeaway that you would like us to communicate?
I mean, I think that's a very beautiful summary, but maybe because this conversation ended on the business model,
Yep.
I think you did also a really nice analysis on that. So business can be a very interesting and experimental place for designers to really help out in the transition that we need. And that includes this creative, engaged, inventive way of thinking about how we take care of that part. So if we can foster this and make it exciting and fun and not draining, because the moment you bring creativity in and also address the relevance and those caring relations and those very positive effects that it's going to have, I think it stops just being this like draining touch point that we need to do.
Yep.
Business as usual, something you cannot defeat, to something that again has more hope and where creativity can really also flourish with interesting effects.
Yeah, so it's about, I think, Melissa used the word, take away the noise and bring it into part of that unleashing that creativity and imagination. So the noise becomes part of that imagination. And if we can bring that together, that'd be like a really beautiful spot to be in there. So thank you, Delfina. We've really enjoyed the episode. We're excited that in the next episode, we're going to bring Caitlin Robinson, who's a social anthropologist by background and also a design research leader with a career that's been shaped by user research, combining life-centered design approaches. Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think, or if you have an idea for a future guest or topic, at www.decodedpodcast.com.
Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you listen, and follow us on TikTok and Instagram at decoded.podcast. See you!